So, I ended off my last video with what would be next for me on my reading list, and that is Midnight Sun. Unlike the other Twilight books, I had never read this one before. I can now happily say that I fixed that, and I've completed the book. So I'm going to get into that here, and I'm going to start off with my general thoughts before I get into some character breakdowns and compare it to the original novel. My general thoughts on this book are that I love it, and I think it's a vast improvement over the original novel. It fixes almost every problem that I had with Twilight, and it's not just down to the point of view change. I feel like Meyer really improved as a writer and thought about what Twilight was lacking and the criticisms of it. Everything is more fleshed out and given more thought. Overall, it's just a more enjoyable book to me. Originally, I said I felt as if there were invisible hands pushing Edward and Bella together, as well as saying that the story felt like a fantasy more than a story. That's completely gone in this book. Everything feels so much more natural in the way that it progresses, because we have the full picture of Edward's feelings. Let's get started on the breakdowns next, though. With her no longer being the point of view character, you'd think we'd get less of a sense of who Bella is in this book, but to me at least, she feels like a more complete person, rather than just a vehicle for the reader to inhabit for the journey. Bella in her own mind sees herself as kind of strange and a little awkward, but through Edward's eyes we get the truth of it, and the truth is she's even more awkward than she thinks. She comes across as fidgety and as someone who has trouble expressing herself unless she's completely comfortable. On that same note, while she thinks of herself as plain and unremarkable, we get to see that practically no one else around does. With Edward's ability to see others' thoughts and perceptions, he sees what everyone else thinks of her. This book also gives us a lot more clarity on who Bella was before she came to Forks. One of my original gripes with her character was that she was kind of blank, with no real history. But here, we actually have Edward asking her all sorts of questions, and a lot of those questions are ones that I had, like her relationship history and her dreams of the future before she knew that becoming a vampire was an option. Seeing her from Edward's outside perspective rather than just being in her head creates a clearer picture of who she is in the real world. We get a bit of that in the main series, but only when she's slowly dying on a couch in the Cullens' living room, so it's not really the same. Here we get to see her in her default state. I like her much more in this book than I did any of the main series books. On a funny note, my mental image of Bella has changed a lot over the years, and it changed particularly for this book for some reason. When I originally read Twilight, I had a mental image very similar to my very first girlfriend, because she was a thin white girl with long brown hair. On my reread in my last video, I pictured Kristen Stewart, because obviously. But now when I'm reading the books, and now when I'm reading Midnight Sun in particular, I have an original vision. The best way I can describe it is to picture Kristen Stewart, but with a shorter, wider face and a pointier chin and much bigger eyes. Edward is probably the biggest flip for me. I always thought he was a little dumb and overly dramatic in the series, and I didn't understand a lot of his choices, especially at this point in the story. Being in his head, though, and seeing his feelings develop and change makes most of those choices more understandable. The prime example being why he keeps getting closer while warning Bella off at the same time. In the original Without His Thoughts, this is where the invisible hands feeling comes from for me. But in Midnight Sun, we're able to see his fascination grow alongside his confidence to control himself. The other big one being his unwillingness to turn Bella into a vampire. In Twilight, it seems like his motivation is solely his views on damnation or salvation of a vampire soul, and he uses Bella missing human experiences as a cover for it. But here we see that so much of what draws him to Bella and so much of what he enjoys of her is from her being alive. If she were a vampire, he'd never hear her heartbeat hasten when she looks at him. He wouldn't ever see her blush or feel the warm pulse of blood when she touches him. In the original series, Jacob was the character I could relate to the most, but in reading this, I find Edward to now be in that place. Reading his feelings and his views on himself had me doing some heavy reflection and thinking about myself in a way I had never done while reading the series before. He's just a guy putting up a little bit of a front sometimes to hide his feelings and insecurities, instead of the unreasonably broody boy that he was in the original novel. He thinks of a lot of his thoughts and problems as purely vampiric issues, when the truth is they're just teenage boy issues, with a Dracula costume on them. Also to note, I really enjoyed his take of the incident in Port Angeles, and the follow-up with Edward not only being concerned over Bella, but actually thinking of the safety of Angela and Jessica as well as every other woman in the city. Though the reveal that the main guy that came after Bella was essentially the East Area rapist makes me think that letting Carlisle drug him and leave him outside a police station was just a bit too light of a punishment for him, given that this monster had the misfortune of encountering vampires. The way Edward talks about himself as a monster that humans are inherently uncomfortable around, even though he isn't really a threat anymore, really hit home with me the most out of anything. I'm no monster or predator, but I have always felt that I make people deeply uncomfortable, and that they just put up with having to be near me sometimes. Even if it's people that I know that like me, sometimes it just feels like they're trying out of kindness more than actually wanting to know me. It's like there's some inherent difference between me and everyone else that makes people uncomfortable with me. A final note on Edward, though, is despite me turning around on him, the thing with him watching Bella sleep is still creepy as hell. But at least here he knows it's creepy, and it's justified just a little more by him using it as time to acclimate himself to her scent so he doesn't kill her when she's awake. I will admit, though, that my mind went to a real wild place for a minute when the line about Edward oiling up her window so that it doesn't make noise came up. It's funny. In the original, she was my favorite of the Cullens. But in this book in particular, she's somewhere in the middle. Still above Rosalie, but she might be behind her brothers at this point. I still like her personality, but it's really her gift that gets to me. Sometimes it just makes the events feel like they have no meaning or impact, because she already knows how it's going to play out. At times her knowledge feels like a hindrance to the plot, and it gets kind of annoying. I'm lumping these two together because they both changed greatly in my estimation of them as characters, and they're about on the same level for me now. In the original book, I feel like we never really got to know either of them at all. As the series went on, we got a lot more of Jasper, and I really got to like him, but Emmett stayed mostly blank and boring to me. It seemed like his only purpose was to be a measuring stick for physical strength. I even said that Emmett was my least favorite character in the original video I made because of this. Now in this novel, we get so much more of the both of them. My highlight of Jasper in this book is after the baseball game, where we get to see that he's stretching his gift to its max in an effort to protect Bella, someone he's barely interacted with but knows means so much to his brother. Then there's the scene of him coming into the ballet studio to attack James, where Edward describes him looking like war incarnate. Again, this is an effort to protect Bella. It really drives home how genuinely good Jasper is, just like Edward, and it actually makes the mishap on Bella's birthday that's coming up in the future seem more tragic to me. And then with Emmett, he actually just got to do and say things in this book. I love that by the time the confrontation at the baseball game is over, he already looks at Bella like one of his sisters. The fact that we can see that he was kind of in the same situation as Bella to some degree, with him looking at his vampire lover as an angel and wanting nothing more than to be with her forever, is a wonderful addition to their relationship. That's on top of us just getting to see more of him being playful and fun with Edward throughout the entire book. It really became a highlight when he was around this time. Rosalie saw some really nice development in this book too, especially when you're only using the original Twilight novel and not the whole series as a contrast point. In the original, she barely gets anything and just occasionally is glaring at Bella and getting snippy with her. In Midnight Sun, we get to see that even though she's still unreasonably obstinate, that she is at least trying for the sake of her brother. Speaking of that relationship, it was also really nice to show how she and Edward came to see each other as siblings when she was originally turned in hopes that she would be his mate. That said, my favorite moment of her in the book is still her being a dick, and that's when she gets tired of Bella looking at her from across the cafeteria and decides to suddenly turn her full gaze on Bella and scare the bejesus out of her. I said back in my original reading video that I felt like Bella's human friends were almost like mannequins in my mental image because they lacked personality and were in no way important to the story. Boy, has my opinion changed with this one. Part of it might be down to me having watched 2, actually now 3 of the movies, like I said I would, and getting strong mental images for the characters. But that's not the whole thing. This book made me hate Mike of all characters. I couldn't do this video without talking about this walking trash bag. Somehow in a book with an actual rapist and a murderous vampire, this douchey teenage boy is the character that I loathe the most. The way he looks at Bella as some kind of trophy to be won, and the way that he's never thinking of her in a way that isn't sexual, makes my skin crawl. Even more than Edward watching Bella sleep. Even when Bella manages to get his attention onto Jessica, instead, his immediate thought is to compare their bodies. When I was speaking of the movies with Princess, I called Mike a vulture, and that tag is stuck because it's so fitting to me. He sees girls as meat to be picked at instead of people. I've seen a couple people going, "Oh, he's just a teenage boy," and they're all like that, and I call bullshit. I was a teenage boy, but I was not like this teenage boy. I will admit that my thoughts about girls often weren't the purest thing in the world, but I still thought of them as people outside of my fantasies. Mike never seemed to consider anything but getting his hands and other parts onto someone. The only time he seems like an actual person that I can relate with is when Edward sees in his head that he's kind of afraid to approach Bella directly and wants her to make the first move so he doesn't embarrass himself. Outside of that brief moment of humanity, he is revolting and I hate him. As a whole, we get so much more of the family and how they get along in their lives, and I love to see it. We get moments between Edward and his sisters showing how much they actually do care for one another, and we get more of Edward and Emmett hanging out and talking and doing things. Outside of the interactions, though, we get to see so much more of their individual personalities. I do wish Esme had more in here, but she's the only one that still felt like they were lacking in something. A standout moment for me is when Edward recalls Alice's arrival and how she hugged him, and in that moment he immediately saw her as his sister despite never seeing her before because of all the futures he could see in her head. I really think this may be my favorite book of the franchise. Actually, I'm pretty sure of it. It makes every character so much more understandable to me, and for me at least, it's the most thought-provoking of the books. It managed to take Edward, a character I was not a big fan of previously, and made me see parts of myself in him when it comes to his insecurities and his fascination with Bella. I genuinely believe that had this and Twilight been a package deal to start the franchise, then the general perception of Twilight would be a lot better. The book is also just a blast to read. Despite being so much longer than the original Twilight, Midnight Sun was fun and it went by fast, and it actually had me on the edge of my seat a couple times, even though I already knew what was going to happen. My problem with the lack of horror in the original was even fixed, with us being able to see some of the nastier parts of the vampire life. I would personally rank this book 4 out of 5, and when I look at my Goodreads account, I gave the original Twilight a 2 out of 5. So now we get into what's next for me and this channel, what might be my next video. Well, I just finished The Second Life of Bree Tanner, and I had it loaded onto my Kindle with only a few pages read when I originally wrote out my scripting for this video, but it's finished now. And I'm currently towards the end of Life and Death because I wanted to revisit that and actually finish it, because I was told that the story starts to diverge a little more after where I left off originally, and from what I can see, that is the truth. But after I finish those 2 books, I think I'm going to be done with Twilight, because that will be everything unless a new book comes out. I think this will be my last Twilight video unless I reconsider doing something for the movies. I've got 2 movies left to watch, and very quickly I will say that I find the movies more enjoyable than I thought I would by far. I still have issues with them, but they are not the monstrosities I always thought they would be. But as for what comes next in books, I've got a couple different book suggestions from Princess Gothic Bean that I have ready to go. I believe she wants me to start with Hunger Games. But before I do that, I'm going to take a small pit stop and reread another book I enjoyed in high school, Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlist. I've been meaning to reread it for a few years. It's a rather short book, so I imagine it might only take me a day, maybe 2, depending on how tired I am from work. I'm thinking that talk of it will appear in a video, but not one focused on it. I've kind of got an idea of a video where I go back over a couple of my high school favorite books, including my favorite book from that time.